This video is going to be about North Korea because there seems to be a lot of fear mongering about the North Koreans and their potential of launching nuclear missiles that threaten the US. So I decided just to investigate this issue for a moment, and in order to lay a foundation for it, I thought I'd go through some of the background material, starting with the Frankists, the Sabbatean heresies, and going to the Illuminati, the Jacobins, etc. So let's start out with Rabbi Edelman on Israeli radio.
On the website as well, so you can just click there and find out where to order Dr. and Rabbi Antelman's books. So, Rabbi Antelman, you were telling me before we started the show that this happens to be the time of the 250-year anniversary of the Council of Four Lands. In Hebrew, you say that as?
Actually, it's the 250th anniversary of a special cherem, which was an excommunication and a ban that they issued. And it's very, very pertinent to us today. And I'll try to bring the connection. First of all, let me say this. There are a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I'm not interested in theories. I'm interested in facts. So the scholarship over the years that I've utilized are sources that are impeccable. For example, Anthony Sutton, professor at Stanford University, wrote 2 books. He wrote more than 2 books, but 2 books which are relevant to what I'm going to speak about. One of his books was Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, and Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. There he goes through a lot of trouble to document the connection between the leaders of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is an acronym also for Carnegie, Ford, and Rockefeller, who provided the main funding for this.
Interesting.
And he's a professor with impeccable credentials. And then there's the late Professor Carroll Quigley, who was professor of political science at Georgetown University. Matter of fact, he was even quoted when Clinton became president in his inaugural address. He quoted Quigley as one of his people that he had studied under. So Quigley was very well known. The CFR loved him, and he decided that he would do a very nice thing. He would reciprocate the love and put out a book called Tragedy and Hope. But when it came out, and it spoke so much about the CFR activities that they didn't want people to know about, they turned against him. And he himself then reassessed his position with them and wrote a book called The Anglo-American Establishment, where he claimed that a handful of people were running the world. And those 2 books are impeccable as source material, but there's other impeccable source material, and that is the scholarly works that were put out by professors at Hebrew University to deal with what we call the Sabbatean conspiracy, which I'll go to in one moment in our history. Let me preface those remarks by saying that, as every Jew well knows, right out of the Haggadah, in every generation they're out to destroy us, and every generation has its killers and persecutors of the Jews. In the 17th century, it was Chmielnitsky, who headed the Cossacks, who was out to destroy Jews and did terrible atrocities, killing hundreds of thousands of Jews in Poland. The atrocities were terrible, and to commemorate this terrible series of events, the Jews kept a fast day, the 20th day of Sivan, to commemorate this, which was lit this past Friday, commemorates the Chmielnitsky massacres. Today, it's no longer an active fast day, but it was observed for a few hundred years. In any event, on the 20th day of Sivan every year, the Vad Arboret, which was the Council of Four Lands, which is the biggest tribunal of its kind at that time, met once a year on this date and took up questions of Jewish law and other things.
So these were very big rabbis, leaders of the community, who were on this Council of the Four Lands.
The Council of Four Lands was backed up by no less than the King of Poland. It began in 1520 and lasted till 1764. It consisted of 30 rabbis, 15 of who were lay leaders and were rabbis, and the others were not lay leaders, they were full-time rabbis. They were dealing with a problem that was a byproduct of the Chmielnitsky massacres. What happened was, when the Jews were massacred like that, people were speaking again about redemption. We were looking around for redemption. And all of a sudden, a man by the name of Shabbatai Tzvi, who was born in 1626 and died in 1676, came along and said, "I am the Messiah." And he had a tremendous following. When it was realized that his following was so great, and there would be problems, the Sultan, because Shabbatai Tzvi was from Izmir, came along and gave Shabbatai a choice. either you die or convert to Islam. So he converted. Now, there were about 1 million followers prior to conversion. When the conversion happened, then there was disillusionment among the Jews. But there were some diehard people who set up different cults of Shabtai Tzvi. And the worst one of them was called the Domeh, which was a secret organization. And Domeh was based in Turkey and in Salonika. And the Domeh gave rise to these terrible orgies that went on, which became part of the immorality theology of Shabtai Tzvi, corrupted later on. He apostatized himself 10 years before his death. So when he died in 1676, he had these cults doing all kinds of evil.
And the reason that these followers of Shabtai Tzvi were doing evil was because what?
Here's the thing. The Talmud says that the Messiah would come when everybody's good or everybody's bad. There is such a saying in the Talmud. So the Sabbatians said like this: it's impossible for everybody to be good, it's easy to be bad. So they turned around the Torah and they said, if you do an evil deed, then you will use up the energy of the universe and it'll collapse, and you will force the Messiah to come because you will have used up all the evil in the world. So whenever they engage in an orgy, they would make a bracha, and every day they would figure out a way to do as many sins as possible. Like if you eat chaylev, you're chayiv karet. In other words, if you eat fat, according to the Torah, you're to be excommunicated from your people. So they would eat fat that was prohibited, non-kosher fat, from a kosher animal, which is chaylev, which is in that category, like eating blood from a kosher
So they would
animal.
do the opposite.
They do the opposite
In order to hasten the
coming of the Messiah,
which is totally ludicrous. These sound like people who are today fodder for all these Davidian, David Koresh cults and all the strangest cults you can find today. Would they be the same type of people?
Same type of people, exactly. As a matter of fact, what happened was after that, after Shabtai Tzvi died, one of the most powerful Sabbatian cults, as they were called, was a transformation of the Domeh, the most extreme cult, to Europe through an insidious person by the name of Jacob Frank. He died in 1791. Now the Frankists started to spread and take over entire communities and make them satanic. Matter of fact, no less a personality than the Nobel Prize winner Isaac Bashevis Singer describes how a community was corrupted in his Satan in Bereg, which is based on very well documented history. So one of the sources that I use is the late Professor Gershom Shalom, who wrote a lot about Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi, the Mystical Messiah, is a very, very thick book in Hebrew and in English. It goes through a lot of things. So to say that he was involved in conspiracy theories is ludicrous, because he has documented studies. There are other professors also, through Gershom Shalom, that were involved with their students at the Hebrew University and still continuing the Sabbatian studies, as they're called, because of the influence of this insidious group. And you can actually trace a line historically, which I do in my book, to the CFR, from Shabtai Tzvi, and another organization called the Illuminati, which was founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. And they were involved also in the French Revolution, which is also well documented.
So what you're saying is that there really does exist a new world order that's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy. And you're a scientist, so you only deal with facts. You don't like to go on hearsay or on jumping to conclusions. Only facts. You've done research and you come to the conclusion. You don't have to come to the conclusion. It's right there in front of you. You gather the facts to show that these are conspiracies that are going on in the world. There is indeed people working in a new world order to try to make this, to try to take over the world power. That's what you're saying.
Right, and there's so many books on the side of the Jewish philosopher that it'd be very ludicrous to compare it, let's say, to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is fiction. So some of the professors at the time of Gershom Shalom was Jacob Katz. Professor Katz wrote a book called The Jews and Freemasonry, which gives a history of the interface between Jews and some of the cults that derived out of Shabtai Tzvi. The next big cult that came from Shabtai Tzvi after the Domeh organization, which is in Turkey, the next big cult were the Frankists, as I mentioned with Jacob Frank. So Jacob Frank, the Vad Arborat, the Council for Lands, wanted to deal with Frank, and they decided to have a big excommunication on the 20th of Sivan 250 years ago. And there, they made the following rulings. They said everybody that is a Frankist is to be excommunicated.
From the Jewish people.
From the Jewish people, bastards to the next generation, is what it said. And they prohibited people, because the Frankists were into Kabbalah, they prohibited the study of Kabbalah until you were 30 or 40 years old and you had a belly full, as they said, full of Talmud. Only then could you study the Kabbalah.
Right.
And they said they're women or whores. And they are hereby excommunicated from our people to the 10th generation.
This is what the Council of Foreign Lands labeled the Frankists,
Right.
because they so deviated from Judaism and all that Judaism holds to be true and righteous. These people went off and made basically their own deformed religion, and so the Jews wanted nothing to do with them. They kicked them out.
That is correct.
Okay.
Now, studying the Frankist family trees, there was a family called the Brushka, which is like first cousin of Jacob Frank. Gershom Scholem spent 6 months in Paris at the National Library to ferret out things about the French Revolution in connection with the Sabbateans. So you can't dispute this material. There's a direct line with the Jacobin Society and with the Illuminati. And Gershom Scholem writes concerning the Brushka, he may have been that he was a member of the Illuminati, but he was devoted to Sabbatianism.
Are there non-Jews that joined this Sabbatian cult?
No, non-Jews did not join the Sabbatian cult, but the non-Jews did join the Illuminati.
And they work together, and you're saying that these two cults or organizations or whatever had planned and staged the French Revolution?
Yes, they were involved in it, and Gershom Scholem proves it with the personality of Brushka, who was taken and he was beheaded on the guillotine because of his involvement.
Wasn't the French Revolution ultimately, I mean, forget about the beheadings because that was horrible, but wasn't it ultimately good? I mean, democracy came from that. You got rid of this, spoiled upper royal class, and the people took over. Wasn't that a positive thing?
There were positive and good things about it. The question is, let's start assessing it from a spiritual side. After the French Revolution, there was the descendancy of the reform and conservative movements. Interestingly enough, you start studying who the leaders were of the conservative reform, you'll find a direct line to the Sabbatian families in Europe of the Frankists.
So they infiltrated back into Judaism and made these cut-off religions. They formed conservative and reformed Jewry.
Right.
Okay, because before that there was only Torah-observant Jews. You were a Jew, period.
Right, and there was solidarity among all the Jews.
So this is Anthony Sutton. This is the research that Rabbi Edelman used, and Anthony Sutton was a scholar in Wall Street and how Wall Street financed all of the various revolutions, starting with the French Revolution and going forward. Here's one of Anthony Sutton's book. He was a Hoover Institute scholar. One of his famous books is Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. Through this book, he documents through researching bank records and documents like 300,000 documents out of World War II. He documents how the Wall Street through Ford, through General Electric, and through Standard Oil basically financed Hitler's rise and actually financed Hitler throughout the war. Averell Harriman was also involved in this, and he basically indicated that Wall Street was on the side of Hitler and not on the side of American interests or the American people interests. However, they are always on the side of Wall Street. These bankers are always on the side of Wall Street. So then the Wall Street Nazi collaboration, World War II, and then his conclusions. Now, I have mentioned these books, scholarly works, to so many of my friends who still will not do any research, will not look at this evidence that piles up that says all these wars have been financed by Wall Street and American corporations. Here's his other book. This is called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. He indicates how Trotsky was financed by the Americans and sent on a train and on a boat to go to Russia to start the Bolshevik Revolution. Lenin was financed by Switzerland and put on a train, and anyway, they fomented the Bolshevik Revolution, and then when the Bolsheviks had only a minor foothold into Russia, then they had a bloodbath and then famine, killing off, they say, close to 60 million people. I do not know. And then after the indigenous are clear-cut, like clear-cut lumber, through genocide and then through famine, then the industrialists come in, and we've got Arm & Hammer. Arm & Hammer was a capitalist of Occidental Oil. I invested in Occidental Oil when I was about 20 years ago, and it was a good stock because Arm & Hammer, that old codger of a Russophile, he always gave a 10% dividend. And the minute that Arm & Hammer died, no more dividend. The stock was not worth anything to anybody who wanted to earn money. So I got out of Occidental Oil. But then they're indicating that Arm & Hammer, the industrialist with Occidental Oil, his father was head of the Communist Party in the U.S. before him. So basically, you have the same people on both sides of capitalism and on both sides of socialism. They're one and the same. And these books are available for people to read, and I'm going to keep referring to them because we still get this right-left paradigm going on. There's no such thing as a socialist, communist that's against capitalism. Capitalism, socialism, capitalism, communism. They're one and the same. They're all owned and promoted by Wall Street. So here we have a Wikipedia entry for members of the Council on Foreign Relations. There's some people maybe that you would recognize. I don't keep up with the elite. Oh, here's Henry Kravis of Colbert, Kravis and Roberts. Of course, he's going to be part of it. Let me go on down here, see if I recognize anybody else. David M. Rubenstein, the Carlyle Group, which you know is the Bush family. Here's George Eric Rupp of International Rescue Committee, CEO of FedEx. Hello. Anybody who's anybody is part of this group. You cannot rise to any kind of wealth in this system that we have without swearing loyalty oaths to this very shady organization. Here's Johns Hopkins. I mean, it's just throughout our Congress, throughout every state, all local cities pledge allegiance to this shady group. But let's go down here to the corporate membership. We got the same old cast of players. You have Chevron, we have Exxon, we have Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. And I want to emphasize that these aren't just corporations. These are organizations and people and systems that are dedicated in a religious war against we, the indigenous people of the earth. For 2,000 years, they have trounced around the world, genociding the indigenous. And I want to also note that in school, when we learned that Columbus sailed to the New World and he found the Indians because he thought they were India, he was in India. No, Indians mean indigenous. That brings us to the very strange case of Kim Jong-un, who is presently the North Korean dictator that is threatening the U.S. with nuclear missiles. And all the press is whipping up the fervor that we are going to be going to war with North Korea.